Hello everyone, it's Mr. G bringing you another obscure history, which I'm still not thrilled about the name, but let's go ahead and keep going. And today I want to talk about Robert Smalls. And several other creators have talked about him, but nobody's really gone into a detail about the man. And so that's what I really want to dive in today. I'm going to dive into the history and how he came to be the way he was and his legacy. Now, Robert Smalls was born in Beaufort, South Carolina in 1839 in a cabin behind the McKee House, his owner. Now, his mother was actually a house servant, and because of this, he actually had a much easier life as opposed to other slaves at the time, and his mother didn't want him to not understand what was going on and how horrible slavery was, so she actually had him work in the fields at a young age so he could understand the plight of other slaves. When he was about 12 years old, he was sent to Charleston to begin working, and he's actually hired out at $16 per week, and he was allowed to keep $1 of that. He started off working in hotels, then became a lamplighter. He eventually worked his way to working in the docks and the wharfs, where his love of the sea allowed him to really flourish. He was a longshoreman, a rigger, sailmaker, and worked his way all the way to a wheelman, which is more or less the helmsman, a pilot of the vessel. Now, at the start of the Civil War, Robert's expertise in Charleston Harbor got him placed aboard this vessel known as the CSS Planter. Now, this was a lightly armored military transport vessel, basically for just traveling around the harbor and moving small and light goods. Now, during the Union blockade, on the date of May 12th, 1862, the Planter actually traveled southwest of Charleston to Coles Island, where they would help dismantle a local Confederate post. And this is actually the day that everything went into action. The ship loaded up ammunition and some cannons and returned back to Charleston Harbor. And while the ship was spending the night in Charleston Harbor, Robert basically asked the officers on board if they could have their families on board while the officers and men had basically left for the night. And this is actually a common practice at the time for crews that were really worked with the slaves that were on board. And so basically the agreement was, yes, you could bring your families on board, just have them gone by daylight because we're setting sail. Not an issue. Robert agreed to this. As soon as the families came on board, they were informed that they were going to try and escape. So at 3 a.m., Smalls and 7 of the 8 enslaved crew members made their planned escape, and the idea was to head straight to the Union blockade. Now, Smalls dressed like the captain. He actually managed to guide the ship past 5 Confederate harbor forts without any incident, even giving them the correct steam whistle signals at checkpoints to prevent them from being fired on. And the last thing they had to get past was Fort Sumter, which was the controlling point, the choke point of Charleston Harbor. Once again, Smalls actually gave the correct hand signs after he was given a challenge signal. Apparently this was a very intense moment because it took longer than they thought for Fort Sumter to return the signal, and they were expected to be blown out of the water at the time. Instead, they were allowed to pass, and it wasn't until after Fort Sumter, when the ship went the wrong direction, not the direction that all other Confederate ships went, that they realized something was wrong, and the alarm was raised that this ship was being stolen. And so he sailed directly at the Union blockade, which he was almost fired upon by them. He had actually removed the Confederate flag and replaced it with a white flag. It was actually a white bedsheet. But basically nobody could see it because it was such a dark night, and it wasn't for the fact that the early morning sunlight had come out. He would have been fired upon. Now, the ship and its cargo were extremely important to the United States. One, it provided them with a lot of ammunition that they didn't have to go and get elsewhere. Secondly, the Planter was a shallow water ship, meaning it had a very low draft. It could go in really shallow water, which gave them an advantage when they needed to invade Charleston Harbor. And thirdly, Robert himself was extremely valuable as he was an expert in Charleston Harbor and provided them with details on mines and other issues that they may encounter in Charleston Harbor. Now, he didn't immediately go to work for the Union. There was some issues in Washington and other things. His expertise kind of went back and forth between the Navy as a civilian consultant and the Army as a civilian consultant. And eventually, his expertise as a pilot was so valued that he was put aboard a ship known as the USS Crusader. And once the repairs were made, the newly rechristened USS Planter also became one of the vessels he piloted. Now, he actually served above both of these ships, helping remove torpedoes, we know them as mines now, along the coast between Beaufort and Charleston. He was briefly the pilot of an ironclad USS Keokuk, basically in the preambles to the Second Battle of Fort Sumter. And sadly, that ship would be lost during the battle, but he would just move on to other service with other ships. Now, immediately after the war, Robert took all the money he had earned as a civilian consultant and the money he had received basically as a prize of turning in the CSS Planter, and he went and bought the McKee House, and it became the Smalls House. And I don't know about you, but that is like the ultimate middle finger to somebody, that you end the war and you come back and you buy the house of the person who once owned you. He also began reinvesting in Charleston. Charleston had been devastated by the American Civil War, so he started bringing in a lot of business, started trying to start businesses, helping people, started opening up shops and things like that that helped a lot of the freemen at the time. He also ingeniously started an 18-mile horse-drawn railway that worked in Charleston Harbor, bringing in heavy goods and materials across the harbor, which was ridiculously a smart idea. And now that he had basically money and fame, he moved his attention towards politics. In 1868, he was part of the South Carolina Constitutional Convention. He pushed basically towards providing public education to every child in South Carolina. He would later move on to the South Carolina House of Representatives, where he worked on various acts, including the Homestead Acts, and was actually very effective in the state legislature. In 1874, he was elected to the first of 2 terms as a U.S. House of Representatives member. Then he moved on to South Carolina's 5th Congressional District House Rep. And after a political scandal, he basically stepped out of politics. However, in 1890, Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd President of the United States, actually appointed him as the collector of the port of Beaufort, which he held until 1913, about 2 years before his death. Robert Smalls basically lived a quiet life after that until his death in 1915, when he died of a combination of malaria and diabetes. And there you have it, just a real quick look at the life of Robert Smalls. There's actually way more. You could probably do a TV series, a TV movie, even a movie about this man's life. It's incredible what he went through. So that's all I have for today. I thank you for joining me. Please look out for more people that we're going to discuss. We're also going to talk about some other things that are not really talked about in history, like the holdouts after World War II. So I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you all the next time.